The Trump administration's announcement sent shockwaves through millions of American households, sparking immediate concern and confusion across the country. For many, the news was both unexpected and deeply unsettling, as families tried to understand what this would mean for their daily lives. SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, suddenly faced a serious threat. Payments could be suspended if the government shut down, leaving families uncertain about how they would put food on the table. Officials cited widespread fraud and called for stricter oversight, insisting that reforms were necessary to protect taxpayer dollars and ensure the program's integrity. However, the timing of these warnings made it clear this was part of a larger budget standoff, with political leaders using SNAP as a bargaining chip in heated negotiations over government funding. Nearly 40 million people who depend on SNAP were left fearing for their next meal, worried that the support they rely on could disappear overnight. The Department of Agriculture warned it might not have the legal authority or sufficient funds to issue benefits without new congressional action, raising the stakes even higher. Panic spread as the USDA declared it could not distribute billions in aid, making the threat of a full stop to SNAP benefits feel very real and immediate for those in need. Critics argued this was a manufactured crisis, accusing the administration of using vulnerable Americans as leverage in political negotiations and putting millions at risk for political gain. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test the nation's social safety net, as advocates, lawmakers, and families braced for what could come next. The situation exposed the fragility of food security for millions, highlighting just how quickly access to basic needs can be threatened by political gridlock and government decisions. The announcement's impact was immediate and deeply personal, sending shockwaves through households across the country. For families like Tina Gigioli's, SNAP isn't a luxury, it's survival. It's the difference between a full pantry and an empty one, between hope and despair. The threat of suspended payments forced impossible choices: pay rent or buy groceries, stretch every dollar or go hungry. Parents found themselves rationing food, skipping meals, and worrying about how to keep the lights on. Uncertainty was as damaging as the loss itself. Families were told to wait, but hunger doesn't wait. Every day brought new anxiety, as parents checked their phones for updates that never came. Local agencies had no answers, fueling fear and rationing. The lines at assistance offices grew longer, and frustration mounted as families searched for help. The cutoff hit not just the unemployed, but working poor, seniors, and people with disabilities. Even those who worked long hours or lived on fixed incomes found themselves suddenly at risk. SNAP bridges the gap for low-wage workers, making it possible to put food on the table after a long shift, and those on fixed incomes, who already struggle to balance medicine, rent, and groceries each month. The suspension threatened the health and well-being of the nation's most vulnerable, pushing many to the brink of crisis and deepening the sense of insecurity. Stories surfaced of parents skipping meals, seniors cutting pills in half to make prescriptions last, and children going to bed hungry. And families turning to overwhelmed food pantries, where supplies were stretched thin, and lines grew longer by the day. The crisis was felt in kitchens and at dinner tables nationwide, with a human cost measured in empty cupboards, anxious faces, and the silent worry of parents trying to shield their children from hunger. As hunger loomed, families across the country faced growing uncertainty about how they would put food on the table. The fear of empty cupboards and skipped meals became a daily reality for many, especially those with children and elderly relatives to care for. In response, several states took the Trump administration to court, determined to protect their most vulnerable residents from losing critical food assistance. Their argument was clear: the federal government couldn't legally suspend a program mandated by law, especially one as essential as SNAP, which millions depended on for survival. Judges agreed, issuing rulings that ordered the administration to release SNAP funds immediately and highlighting contingency options that could be used to keep the program running. This was a major victory for both states and struggling families, affirming that food assistance programs couldn't be held hostage by political disputes or government shutdowns. Public outcry exploded. Protests erupted in cities nationwide, advocacy campaigns gained momentum, and the hashtag #ChawFundSnap swept across social media, uniting people in a call for action. Americans were outraged at the idea of cutting off food aid to children, seniors, and working families, seeing it as a cruel and unnecessary hardship. Despite clear court orders, the administration claimed it lacked the necessary funds, creating a tense and highly publicized standoff that left many in limbo. Legal and budget experts quickly disputed these claims, insisting that options and resources did exist to keep SNAP funded if the will was there. The result was widespread confusion and continued hardship, even after what seemed like a legal win, as families anxiously waited for promised relief. The legal fight may have been won in the courtroom, but for many families, the wait for real help and food on the table dragged on. The battle for food security was far from over, and the struggle to ensure no one went hungry continued in communities across America. With federal payments frozen, states and charities faced an impossible task. No state could replace the billions SNAP provides each month. Emergency funds and program diversions were only temporary fixes. Food banks, already stretched thin, saw demand skyrocket and supplies vanish. For every meal a food bank provides, SNAP provides 9. Charities couldn't fill the gap. The SNAP infrastructure is federally tied, making emergency state aid slow and difficult. The crisis exposed how quickly the federal-state partnership can unravel. Governors warned of dire economic and social consequences as SNAP dollars support local economies. The suspension was both a hunger crisis and an economic blow. States and charities were left trying to hold back a tidal wave of need with too few resources. In Tennessee, nearly 700,000 residents rely on SNAP, a lifeline for basic nutrition. The sudden halt in payments created anxiety and left state officials with no answers. Local offices couldn't tell families when or if benefits would arrive. Food pantries braced for a surge, but supplies were limited. The average benefit, about $187 per person per month, was vital for low-income households. Without it, families faced impossible choices: medicine or food, lights or groceries. The delay threatened to push thousands deeper into poverty and food insecurity. Eventually, partial benefits were restored, but the damage was done. Budgets remained tight, and hardship continued. Tennessee's crisis showed how federal decisions create chaos for families just trying to eat. The state's struggle mirrored the national one, a community on edge, waiting for relief. Partial benefits didn't end the hardship. Families still received far less than they needed. Grocery budgets were slashed, forcing families to buy less or eat less. Children's health, seniors' medication, and basic nutrition were all at risk. The crisis hit the most vulnerable, hardest elderly, disabled, and families with young children. Food banks and charities rationed resources, sometimes turning people away. The strain revealed deep inequalities and how close many are to the edge. The SNAP crisis was more than a logistical problem. It was a source of anxiety and distress. The political standoff in Washington created a real humanitarian issue. SNAP isn't just a budget line, it's a lifeline for stability, dignity, and food. The human cost was measured in hunger, hardship, and the erosion of community support. The SNAP crisis was born from political deadlock in Washington. As the shutdown dragged on, SNAP became a bargaining chip in a high-stakes game. Millions wondered if they'd be able to feed their families. Partial benefits were a temporary fix, not a solution. The underlying conflict remained. Long-term funding was still uncertain, leaving families bracing for more disruption. The episode exposed how fragile food security is when politics intervene. The future of SNAP remains uncertain, with talk of stricter requirements and reduced eligibility. For millions, stability is still out of reach. Food assistance is not a partisan issue, but a matter of national health and security. Without a reliable SNAP program, millions face an unstable and uncertain future.